All right, let's get the latest on this story with SABC News correspondent Sarah Coates, who's joining us from Tel Aviv. Sarah, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for this update. Look, according to today's news reports, Netanyahu has reiterated right at the start of his weekly cabinet meeting today that Israel will not give in to extreme demands from Hamas, despite, of course, that growing international pressure. So one wonders then what will happen at the scheduled peace talks that are scheduled to take place in Cairo today.
Yes, hello there, Alicia. We do know that this Israeli delegation is on the way to Cairo. Really a lot of hope surrounding this fresh round of talks, although we did hear, as you just mentioned, from the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying there simply will be no ceasefire deal unless these some 134 hostages are released from the Gaza Strip. This has really, of course, been this sticking point since the beginning. Israel saying no ceasefire unless these hostages are released. Hamas saying no hostages unless there is a ceasefire. So it certainly will be very interesting to see if all of this pressure this time around can sort of sway either of these parties into giving more up. But it really does seem as though this sticking point, this stumbling block does remain. Also there, of course, is this stumbling block which is allowing these Palestinians in the southern part of the Strip who actually live in the northern part of the Strip to return home, including men of fighting age, which is something that Netanyahu continues to say will not happen. Now, you mentioned that pull out of troops there from Khan Yunis. We do know that one brigade is still in the central part of the Gaza Strip. What they'll be doing, reportedly, is preventing these people from moving back up to the north and also helping to facilitate aid to go to these people in the north, which, as we've been hearing from aid groups, are on the brink of famine. These people there have reportedly been receiving some 245 calories per day. That is around the same as a can of beans. So a lot of hope really resting on this latest round of ceasefire talks. And we are just seeing growing anger here on the ground. Tens of thousands of Israelis turning out to a demonstration in Tel Aviv overnight, demanding that the Prime Minister Netanyahu do all he can to secure the release of these hostages. Also demanding early elections over his handling of the war, with many people here in Tel Aviv, here in Israel, believing that Netanyahu is no longer fit to hold his role, saying he's been putting his own political survival above that of the country. So certainly a lot happening here on the ground and also in a wider region as this war drags on 6 months in now.
You know, Sarah, those protests, right, in Tel Aviv last night, we saw images depicting widespread protests in Tel Aviv streets yesterday evening. Can you tell us what the current situation is right now? And are you able to then confirm that all these protests are, in fact, against the current leader, Benjamin Netanyahu?
What we've really been seeing with regards to these protests, they're often merging. They may start as one of these will be for hostage release, one of these will be an anti-government protest, and even smaller movement is an anti-war protest. They've been getting so big and there's so much anger that a lot of the time now they're sort of merging into one. Anti-government protest, bring the hostages home, and of course anti-war. So these people here on the ground, they are just becoming increasingly desperate, increasingly angry, and increasingly fed up with the government. And it is important to say that all of these latest polls that have been carried out by Hebrew media, TV stations and such, they have been showing that if elections were to be held today, that Benjamin Netanyahu and his Likud party, they would lose. The winner there would be Benny Gantz, who's seen as more of a centrist politician. We do need to remember that he is the one that was handpicked by the US President Joe Biden to actually travel to Washington to hold those meetings just a few weeks ago. This was really upsetting to the Prime Minister Netanyahu. He tried to block Benny Gantz. He told the Israeli embassies abroad not to facilitate his visit. But really internationally, Benny Gantz is seen as the one potentially who can bring Israel out of this conflict and sort of talk some reason, I think you could say. So certainly a lot of pressure, a lot of frustration with Netanyahu. And we've just been seeing this time and time again as this US rhetoric becomes increasingly harsh towards Benjamin Netanyahu. So certainly many people here on the ground in this country believe Netanyahu's time is up. Others believe he may be continuing this war for his own political survival. But certainly there could be a day of reckoning in the coming months if and when elections are held.
Very interesting, Sarah. You know, we understand that the Israeli military, as you also alluded to earlier, has withdrawn more ground troops from the southern Gaza Strip. But one has to ask, what is the meaning of this if Israel remains defiant in ending those hostilities? But also, maybe in closing, we're also getting wind that at least 2 soldiers who were thought to still be held captive in Gaza were actually found killed. Now, how accurate are these reports? Has there been any response from Hamas about these allegations? And has there been any headway in getting a status update of all the hostages that are currently being held by Hamas?
Okay, so certainly we haven't heard exactly why these troops are being pulled out of Gaza. One could imagine potentially that they may be given a rest. It's been 4 months or so that this ground operation has been ongoing, and these people have been there day in, day out, so they would certainly be tired. There is, of course, talk that they may be being pulled out to regroup for another kind of mission, because as we've been hearing time and time again from the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, that there will be an operation down into that Gazan city of Rafah down in the south. Israel believes that this is where these last Hamas battalions are stationed, and Netanyahu's been saying that this is going to happen whether there's international pressure or not. We do need to remember that this is something that the international community is just so very concerned about, given there are some 1.3 million internally displaced Palestinians sheltering down in the south. And this is an area really that could not see an operation go down in there without causing quite large civilian casualties. This, of course, is the concern there from the United States. Now, when it comes to hostages, there's been very little information that's been coming out regarding the welfare or the whereabouts of these hostages, except for what we've really been hearing from these released hostages. They've been detailing horrendous situations such as rape, starvation. What we do need to remember, according to these testimonies, is it's not just the people in Gaza that are suffering and that are starving. According to testimony from recently released hostages, they are also not being fed. So it's certainly a very concerning situation. Hamas has been putting out these videos saying that more and more hostages have been killed by airstrikes, although given the lack of access to journalists on the ground, the lack of access to aid groups even on the ground, this is very, very difficult to independently verify. So certainly a lot of concern about the fate of these hostages, and this is why we are seeing these massive protests right around the country with people calling on the government not just to go to these talks and to talk with these mediating parties, but just to say yes and to do a deal to bring these people home.
Sorry, we're going to leave it there. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I still wanted to find out about that makeshift docking bay that was supposed to be temporarily constructed there for aid delivery to be brought into Gaza. But we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for that update. SABC News correspondent there, Sarah Coates, live to us from Tel Aviv.